I want to show you how we can use Desmos graphing calculator to not only graph linear equations, but to also give us the table of values we would use to graph this. Now, what is this table of values? Well, as part of our textbook, as we learn to graph linear equations, one of the first things we're going to be doing is taking the equation, selecting different values for x, meaning we're going to actually replace x with these values so that we can find what the y value is at that x value. We'll see what that looks like. And then finally, use that to get our x, y coordinates. So here's where we're going to start. First, whenever we are creating a table of values, I want to tell you about the x values. You are allowed to pick whatever numbers you want for your x values. But what I suggest doing is keeping our x values around 0. And by around 0, I mean that these numbers are going to be the numbers that are closest to 0. So say I put 0 in the middle, that would give me -1 and -2 on the left side, 1 and 2 on the right side. Again, you can pick whatever numbers you want for the x value, but it does help to try to keep them surrounding 0 for our practice. Now, I want to go ahead and make this something even simpler than in the past. Now, when creating these table of values, where we start once we pick our x values is we now take the equation and substitute those x values into the equation. So starting with -2, the equation says -3 times x, but x is -2, and then -5. Now, if we use the Desmos scientific calculator, we can easily find an answer to that. -3 times -2 minus 5. And what we find is that the answer is 1. How we use this is in the final column, this creates for us the ordered pair of -2 is my x, and +1 is my y. On a graph, what that looks like is starting at the origin, I go left to -2 and up to +1, and here is that coordinate. Now, we can simplify this for us. You saw how we actually had to go and calculate what the y value is. But we have another calculator, the Desmos graphing calculator, that's going to allow us to cut some corners. And how this is going to work is now the next step would be to take the equation and plug in the next x value. Instead of having to go to the calculator and calculate this each time separately, I'm going to use Desmos graphing. I'm going to type in our linear equation. I see on the graph that this is what my line is going to look like. I may have forgotten to mention linear, again, means line. So all of these are going to be lines on the graph. Now, here's how we cut corners. I'm going to go back up to this equation. Notice I clicked on it. And I'm going to click on this gear that says Edit List. I'm going to click on it. Where my equation is at, I want you to notice we now have two options: convert table or duplicate. We are going to select convert to table. And when we do, I now have a table of values for this equation. If we check, if we were to finish solving -3 times -1 minus 5. Let's see, I can place that in here, and I find my answer is -2. The same thing is shown to us in our table of values, where when x is -1, the next column says -2. And that translates into the ordered pair of -1, comma, -2, close parenthesis. So I'll go ahead and now graph that point. Starting at the origin, I go left to -1 and down to -2. Here is my new point on the graph, and this was the ordered pair. Instead of going through and solving each of these by substituting in the x, I'm going to cut corners, and I'm going to finish copying from the table of values in Desmos. When x is 0, y is -5. When x is 1, then y is -8. And when x is 2, y is -11. So I have my ordered pairs of 0, -5, and 1, -8, and finally 2, -11. Before I graph them, I want you to notice that I left that second column blank. Notice I did not fill in these 3. And that's okay. I'm not going to fill those in. The part that is most important in these table of values are the x column and the y column. The second and fourth column are there to help us understand what the order of actually processing this information is. Let's go ahead and finish graphing these points. Let me pick some different colors. So I'm going to do 0, -5. Start at the origin. The 0 means I don't go anywhere. But then the -5 tells me to go down to -5. On this graph, I cannot fit any other points. My graph down there stops at -6. So I am unable to graph 1, -8, and 2, -11. So I'm not going to. In order to wrap this up, I do need to go ahead, graph this line. I'm going to use my straight line tool. And whenever we make a line, we need to make sure the line goes to the edge of the graph like this. And we need to make sure it has arrows on the end, because lines are infinite. They don't actually stop unless we tell them to. They will keep going and keep going until infinity. Again, use Desmos to your advantage. I will show you one more time. If you type in the equation, you can then hit the gear, that's the edit list button. Then select your the first button here that says convert to table. Now you have these tables, these values that translate to XY coordinates that you can put on your graph.